Is there any hope for Paul George heading into the 2025-2026 NBA season? That's what we're going to explore here on today's show. Is PG cooked? Was it just the injuries? Can he still play at an elite level? We will talk about it here today. Before I get into my thoughts and go through some of the numbers that he had last season and whether or not I think he can play well, I just want to know this from you guys. Do you even want Paul George on the Sixers next year, or would you rather just try to ship him out, get him out of Philadelphia, and move on if you could? Give me a Y for yes if you do want Paul George on this Sixers team moving forward, or give me an N for no if you have had it with PG. Now, for those of you that said, I don't want him on the team anymore, I'm done, let's move on. Unfortunately, for those of you that think that way, Daryl Morey basically confirmed in his end of season press conference that Joel Embiid and Paul George will be returning next season, and they're still focused on building the team around these stars and trying to compete with their big three. So now, as we look forward towards next year, I'm kind of trying to shift the conversation more from will Paul George be back? Can we trade him? To can the Sixers get anything out of Paul George after a disaster of a year? And look, going back to last summer, I supported the Paul George signing. When we were live on 76ers Now until I think like 2 a.m. Eastern time, waiting for them to sign, and they finally signed the dotted line with Paul George, I was ecstatic. I thought this move was going to be the one that put the Sixers over the top with his fit with Maxey and Paul George and him coming off a not even relatively healthy year. He played 70 plus games with the Clippers his final season and played pretty well. I was all for it. Of course, that didn't end up turning out how some of us might have thought it would. And really, from the beginning, it was rough from the injuries he suffered in the preseason, causing him, he had not one but two knee hyperextensions, causing him to miss time at the beginning of the year. Then in his first game back, he doesn't know the score at the end of the game, takes a long two over a three, causes the Sixers his first game back. And then the injuries throughout the entire season with, as I mentioned, two knee hyperextensions, a torn ligament in his hand. He had a groin injury that seemed to hamper him pretty much the entire second half of the season and was really bothering him for much of the year. And even when he was out there and he was playing, he could never get in a rhythm. He was never able to find that efficient, typical Paul George form that we really know. But the reason I'm bringing this up today in particular and questioning, can he get back to the player he once was, is because we did see during the season back in January a flash of what we thought Paul George might have been able to be for the Sixers for an entire season. In January, after he seemed to be fully recovered from the hyperextensions in his knee, and before he suffered the ligament injury in his hand and the groin injury, Paul George had a stretch of 10 games where he averaged over 20 points a game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, shooting efficiently like we know Paul George was supposed to be able to do. 47% from the field and nearly 45% from three. And even apart from that stretch, there were still games here and there where we saw flashes. He was good in the Christmas Day win over the Boston Celtics, playing good defense, making it hard for Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. That was the idea with bringing in Paul George, right? Was he's the one who would be the third option on offense. Ideally, you had a healthy Joel Embiid. Of course, you didn't. And then he would be able to guard the other opposing good wings across the league, like your Tatums and your Jaylen Browns on the Celtics. But we didn't get enough of those flashes throughout the year. I don't want to sound like I'm totally sticking up for the guy and making all these excuses because he was healthy, or when he was healthy, he still had a lot of really bad games and poor shooting performances, poor effort at times, wasn't always saying the right things. The whole podcast debacle was a little bit ridiculous with him stopping late in the season when the Sixers were already out of it at that point. So as we look forward toward next year, the question that we really have to ask is Paul George, and was Paul George playing poorly because of the injuries? Again, he, before the season even started in the preseason, had those hyperextensions. So it threw everything off right from the start. And then he wasn't really healthy for a large stretch at all. So is it because of the injuries that he played poorly? Or is he really just washed at this point, getting up there in age in his career? All his injuries over time is catching up to him. Maybe he doesn't have it anymore. Well, Paul George talked about his approach this summer and getting back into the swing of things to try to make and get back to where he used to be for the Sixers team next season. Here's what PG had to say. This is an amazing fan base, amazing city to play for. Obviously, there were great interactions with fans. it definitely left me with, all right, I want to get to work this summer. This is a place that you want to win. The injury stuff was some stuff that I didn't necessarily know I had going on until deep diving and finding out like there was other stuff that I didn't know was going on that was causing a limitation, which was frustrating. Those things are being addressed, so that's the positive. Now, hopefully, whatever this injury things that he didn't know about is that is being addressed, hopefully that can get him back to being where he once was. But really, it all comes back to the same question. Can Paul George bounce back next year for the Philadelphia 76ers after a year that was filled with poor play, injury upon injury upon injury, with him ultimately being shut down late in the year? Honestly, I'm skeptical that he can be what he once was until I see it on the floor, because although he had his moments last year and he had a stretch in January where he did play pretty well, now that he's another year older, coming off another year filled with injuries, it's tough for me to say that I fully trust he can have a bounce back year. Now, granted, you don't need all-star level Paul George. You didn't even need that last year, and he wasn't even close to that. You just need Paul George to be efficient enough on the offensive end, which he was not efficient this last season, and then play good defense on that back end against some of the other wings in the Eastern Conference. So while I think he still knows how to play basketball, and I think he's still a very talented player, it's tough for me to confidently tell you that I believe in a bounce back until I see some better play from Paul George on the floor, or until he proves that it really was just the injuries last year that he said he is fixing this offseason. So, what say you? Do you want Paul George in the Sixers? It's a simple yes or no. Let me know down in the comment section right now. We're going to get on the other side of this ad break to some things that Paul George, Tyrese Maxey have been saying that they plan to do to improve the team next year and get back to playing at the level they were supposed to heading into the previous season. But before we do all that, got to give a shout out to today's sponsor, and that is Game Time. We are in such a great stretch right now on the sports schedule, with the NBA playoffs about to be underway, the NHL playoffs about to be underway. We have the MLB season now in full swing. And if you're trying to attend one of these sporting events, well, you're going to need a place to buy tickets, and there's no better place to buy tickets than with the Game Time app. Game Time makes getting tickets faster and easier, even for some of these hard to get playoff seats. And prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer you get to tip off, with killer last minute deals, all in prices, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. And it's not just for sporting events either. You can go to concerts, comedy shows, theater events, and more. And Game Time specializes in these last minute deals. Right now, you can save up to 60% off buying last minute for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. If you want to go to a Phillies game, for example, you can load up that Game Time app and you can see what you'll be seeing from the seat, either on that map view, top-down view, if you want to pick where in the stadium you want to sit. And then when you click on your seat, it lets you see the view from your seat. You can get a panoramic view before you buy in the app from every seat in the house. And I encourage you to toggle the all-in pricing feature as well. That'll show you the total upfront with no surprise fees at checkout. So be sure, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code CHATSPORTS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code CHATSPORTS for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. So how can the Sixers get back to where they want to be with Paul George, Tyrese Maxey, and Joel Embiid coming back next year, according to Daryl Morey? Well, the focus so far in these end-of-season press conferences and exit interviews has been building chemistry both on and off the court. Here's Paul George talking about building chemistry with his fellow teammates, specifically Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid. We've already talked about seeing each other, where we're going to be this summer. We've had those conversations about connecting once the season is over. I think it's very important. I don't think it's healthy to go 2-3 months before seeing each other, regardless of if we're checking in over the phone. It's just different seeing each other. Doesn't even have to be basketball-wise, just breaking bread, being together. I think that has a ton of value, and it's very important. And I definitely do agree, especially with this big three, because Paul George, Maxey, and Embiid played just 14 games together last season. And they weren't even that good when they did all play together, 7-7. So, we want to talk about health with this team. It's one thing if they get healthy, but even if they do get healthy, they haven't showed they could play well together. So they need to build that chemistry as well. And Tyrese Maxey alluded to it as well in his end of season press conference. It's extremely important, man. I said this at the beginning of the year, like at Media Day last season. I said, listen, right now we're just names on paper, and that's a fact. I mean, we got to see how it gets put together, how it doesn't get put together, who works with who doesn't work with who. And I mean, I don't think we ever really figured it out. We never really figured it out. It's kind of the story of the Sixers season. They never were able to figure pretty much anything out when it came to any aspect of their basketball team. So, like, as I said, health is going to be a big factor for Philly. I don't need to keep harping on that, right? It just kind of is what it is. Either you're healthy or you're not. This team's not going to be good if their stars aren't healthy. We just kind of have to wait and see if Joel Embiid and Paul George can get back to full strength. But even with full health, let's say this Embiid surgery works. He comes back ready for the beginning of the season. And let's say Paul George recovers from his injuries and he's back at full strength at the beginning of the year. Even if they are healthy, they need better cohesion and they need to learn how to play together. They're basically starting over from point A this season because they had no time last year to all play together. So you can't really trust, somebody like Paul George, to bring it back to Paul George. How am I supposed to trust him to be able to play at an elite level and do what he needs to do if he's not yet acclimated still to playing with his all-star level teammates? To me, this falls on Nick Nurse, and this is going to be such a big year for Nick Nurse. Year one of the Sixers, I thought he did a great job. Joel Embiid was playing the best basketball of his career before he got injured. Then he goes down. And, this past season, kind of a wash for Nurse. I thought he did some good things, playing some younger players. Tough to evaluate him too much when he had 55 different starting lineups in 82 games. That is absolutely ridiculous. No coach should have to go through that. But look, also, I know Nurse and Morey are coming back next season. Daryl Morey confirmed that him and Nick Nurse are safe and will be on this team, coaching this team next season. But it was reported today that some of Nick Nurse's coaching staff could get fired and could get changed around. You know who that happened to last season? Taylor Jenkins, who ended up getting fired by the Memphis Grizzlies. So I think could be a little bit of a hot seat year for Nick Nurse to replacing some of his coaching staff, kind of maybe putting some pressure on him to get it right, or else he could be out the door. So very big year for Nick Nurse, assuming this team is healthier. And then I also am looking at Tyrese Maxey, right? Can he be that true alpha 1A kind of player? That's kind of the next bar I'm setting for him because he's accomplished pretty much everything else so far in his career. He's shown to be a very good playoff player. Against the Knicks, he was great. And he's shown he can be a very good, number two, pseudo number one kind of option on a playoff team. But can he take that real leap and be one of the top 10 kind of players in the league? I don't ever want to put a ceiling on how good Tyrese Maxey can be because he's always seemed to outperform our expectations for him year in and year out. And although it was a tough year for him, he remains positive. And I still liked what I saw from him, especially earlier in the year before he dealt with injuries. I also like what I saw from him from a leadership perspective, and I hope that continues heading into next year. Look, I'll end with this. I know how frustrating this all is, and every time I even talk positively about the Sixers, thinking maybe there's hope for this player, for this aspect of the team, people don't want to hear it because of how frustrating this year was. And I know that when, especially we're talking about something that you can't control with injuries, it's very, very unfortunate and tough to deal with. But look, the season's done. I know it was tough to get through, but it's over. So we can now look forward and move ahead to next year. And I don't think just because last year was such a disaster, we have to be all gloom and doom now heading into the next year. The Sixers have some good pieces. They have some talent. If you get better injury luck, they're going to be a lot better than they were last year. I can guarantee you that. And it's up to Daryl Morey, Nick Nurse, and these guys to get it back on track, which I think they absolutely can. Be sure to hit that sub button if you're looking for more coverage of the 76ers. It's absolutely free. Caution nothing to subscribe to the channel, and you get insightful, informative, entertaining videos on the Sixers pretty much every day at this point. We're trying to get to 22,000 subscribers here on the channel. So if you made it this far, hopefully that means you like the video and you like the content. So if you're not, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you next time here on 76ers Now.